So, I was super excited to vote for the first time in 2016. I'm old, I know. And I walk into the polling place, and this lady, bless her heart, she looks at me with the widest eyes. She goes, "Oh, aren't you just the cutest little thing?" Now, I'm used to that. I know I look young, I'm short, and I'm wearing my backpack. I just kind of smiled and moved on, but when I go to give her my ID, she's just like, "Oh, you're not old enough to vote. You're too young." Now, people, when I tell you that I go through this on a near daily basis, I need you to trust me. Studio magic helps me to look a little taller, but look, I'm gonna give this lady a break. I put my ID on the table so she can just check my voter registration, and I can do my duty as a citizen. She stares at it for a really long time and just continues with, "There's no way you can be older than 16. Look at this girl." Now, at this point, I'm getting pretty annoyed. I just say, "No, ma'am, I'm old enough. My ID is real." And she does a whole thing holding it up to the light and just makes a really big deal about it. So if you think that's annoying or frustrating, I can only imagine what it's like for other people without a baby face. The way voting works can be complicated, so consider this us linking arms as I guide you through the system. My name is Mylia Laughlin, and this is What the Gov. All right, so the history of voting is long and complicated, but that's why we've got the Amendment Corner. All citizens haven't always had the right to vote. Amendments have been added over time to our Constitution in order to give everyone the voting rights they deserve. Before we can get into voting rights, we have to discuss how we got there. The path for Black people to vote was extremely difficult. The 13th Amendment states, "Neither slavery nor involuntary servitude, except as a punishment for crime whereof the party shall have been duly convicted, shall exist within the United States or any place subject to their jurisdiction." This means that slavery is illegal, plain and simple. Moving forward, we have the 14th Amendment, which further expanded on the rights of former slaves. The first section states, "All persons born or naturalized in the United States and subject to the jurisdiction thereof are citizens of the United States and of the state wherein they reside. No state shall make or enforce any law which shall abridge the privileges or immunities of citizens of the United States, nor shall any state deprive any person of life, liberty, or property without due process of law, nor deny to any person within its jurisdiction the equal protection of the laws." So this basically means that anyone born in the United States is a citizen and has the rights of a citizen. This is important because it ensured that the freed slaves were officially U.S. citizens and were awarded the rights given to U.S. citizens by the Constitution. But just because you have the rights doesn't mean that you have all of the rights, or that they're able to be freely exercised. Let's get started with the 15th Amendment. The 15th Amendment reads, "The right of citizens of the United States to vote shall not be denied or abridged by the United States or by any state on account of race, color, or previous condition of servitude." This amendment was key in giving all men, regardless of color, the ability to vote. However, just because the federal government passed this amendment, it doesn't mean that it was simple for Black men to vote everywhere. Many states created laws to make it as difficult as possible for Black men to vote, such as enacting poll taxes and literacy tests. In some places, there was violence against Black men just because they were trying to do their duty as citizens to vote. One instance of violence was the Colfax Massacre, which occurred on Easter Sunday in 1873 in Colfax, Louisiana. Over 100 Black men were murdered after occupying the local courthouse. This was one of the most violent instances during the Reconstruction era. The Ku Klux Klan, among several other white supremacy groups, were using intimidation and lynchings to stop Black men from exercising their right to vote. However, this didn't stop the men from continuing their fight for that right. So yeah, Black men were technically given the right to vote in 1870, but it took nearly 100 years for the federal government to ban poll taxes and remove Jim Crow laws that were put in place to limit and restrict the lives of Black people. Women didn't get the right to vote until 1920 with the 19th Amendment. It states, "The right of citizens of the United States to vote shall not be denied or abridged by the United States or by any state on account of sex." This means all women have the right to vote. There were many steps along the way that Americans had to take to get their rights to vote, and even still, there can be some difficulties. We're going to get into that coming up next. Every election cycle, we hear the same thing. Make sure you vote. Your vote matters. But many Americans wonder, does my vote really matter? The answer is, well, duh, of course it does. But your vote has different levels of power at the local, state, and federal level. Let's talk about our first big question. How does voting work? First of all, let's get a definition out of the way. An election is when leaders are chosen for public offices or jobs by voters. Elections can be held for a variety of people, some who have local jobs. An example of a local leader is a mayor or a council person. There are also elections for state and national leaders, like your state's governor. Now, if you have some grievances or want to see some change happen at your local level, you better be at your polling place bright and early in order to vote and make sure your voice is heard. Voting at the local level is really important because those are the people who represent you immediately and will do the most for your local communities. These are people who typically live in the area and already know the communities and what kinds of things people need. There's just no level of government that is more directly responsible for serving your community than your local elected officials. In fact, the local government can impact almost every aspect of your day-to-day life. Let's think about it. I mean, it's your local school quality, policing and public safety, rent costs and affordable housing, public transit. I mean, the list goes on and on. For example, a mayor who lives in the city might drive over the same bumpy road that their constituents do. By voting for a candidate who advocates for improving city roads and infrastructure, you can feel assured that your problems will be solved. However, that doesn't mean state elections aren't important. By holding your state officials like the senators and representatives accountable, you can make sure they are properly representing you at the federal level. Your governor runs your state. You can think of them as a mini president. They rule over the state they were elected governor of. A governor's official duties can include signing bills into law, serving as commander-in-chief of the state's National Guard and militia forces, convening special sessions of the state legislature, delivering a State of the State address to citizens, granting commutations and pardons to prisoners, and appointing people to various judicial and state offices. And finally, there's the federal level. Yeah, this is the most tricky. Let's dive into how the infamous Electoral College works. Electoral College, is that like some school for electorates? Nah, it's not a physical building or school or place. It's just a group of people, which I'll get into. It has roots in the word collegium, which means a group of people with equal power. When you vote for president, you might think, well, isn't my vote supposed to go directly to the person I wanted it to go for? Well, not exactly. You see, when people vote for president, they are really voting for an elector from their state. Each state has a certain number of electors. These electors then vote for president. That's why in 2016, despite Hillary Clinton winning the popular vote, Donald Trump still won the Electoral College vote. Well, how are these electors even chosen? It depends on the state and its rules, but usually the political party of the presidential candidate who won the state chooses the electors. Each state gets an elector for each member of Congress from that state. That is one for each member for the state in the House of Representatives, and then another two for the state's 2 senators. For example, California gets 55 electors since it has 53 representatives and then 2 senators. Maryland has 10 because it has 8 representatives and 2 senators. So you might ask, well, do the electors have to vote in a certain way? Interestingly enough, no. In some states, there are laws requiring that electors vote the same as the people who voted for them. Most of the time, electors vote as expected, but in rare cases, they've changed their vote and voted for a different candidate than the people who voted for them. In most cases, it's winner take all. You get all of the electoral votes, or you get none of them. That is, except for Maine and Nebraska because they're special or something. In most states, even if one candidate won by a single popular vote, they would get all of the electoral votes. So it's possible that one popular vote in California could make the difference of 55 electoral votes. I mean, that's huge. Could you imagine your vote making or breaking 55 electoral votes? Okay, but the real question here is, why? Why would the founding fathers come up with something so convoluted? Well, we have evidence to believe that it was because they really hated the idea of a monarchy for obvious reasons. The Electoral College process is outlined in Article 2, Section 1 of the Constitution. It was adopted at the Constitutional Convention in 1787 and was the process used to elect our first president, George Washington. The system reflects the Founding Fathers' concern with separation of powers and checks and balances. The people get to vote for president, the states retain plenty of power, and electing a president is a separate process from electing members of Congress. Let's just say the Founding Fathers didn't exactly have the most faith in the American people. Alexander Hamilton and the other founders believed that the electors would be able to ensure that only a qualified person becomes president. They believed that with the Electoral College, no one would be able to manipulate the American citizens and lead them astray. Plain and simple, they didn't believe in the general population's ability to make the right choice. The founders also believed that since the Electoral College only meets for presidential elections and then they're dissolved immediately afterwards, that would eliminate the chances that they could be swayed or manipulated over time by foreign governments or others. Yeah, that was the plan. A lot of people think that the Electoral College should be abolished. There are a lot of pros and cons to the Electoral College, which I think are worthy of discussion. On one hand, here are our pros. The way we currently do things protects the states' rights. The United States is a republic of states, and each state should be able to apportion its electorates as it sees fit. The Electoral College keeps high population states and regions from deciding the presidency. Without the Electoral College, a large number of votes in one state could decide the entire election. Is it really fair that one group of people could decide over another just because there are more of them in one area? However, playing devil's advocate here, we have our cons. It has happened 4 times that the winner of the election didn't have the popular vote. Doesn't that technically mean that the government didn't choose the candidate that was selected by the people? And also, with the Electoral College, it makes some votes count more than other votes. In 2012, there were less than 200,000 people per electoral vote in Wyoming, but more than 700,000 people per electoral vote in Texas. That means that you would need about 3 people in Texas to vote the same way to have the same impact as 1 person in Wyoming. A little unfair, don't you think? The Electoral College also makes political candidates spend more time and focus on appeasing states with more electoral votes, such as Florida and Ohio. A lot of people might say, oh, well, I might as well not vote because my state always goes blue or red. But I raise you this point. States that are swing states like Ohio, Michigan, Pennsylvania, Wisconsin, they weren't always that way. Over time, the margin keeps shifting. And sure, your vote might not in that instant make a difference because of the overwhelming lean of your state, but slowly that shift could occur if others feel similarly. Kind of confusing, isn't it? Voting is an integral part of our democracy, and without it, the people would have a huge missing piece of what makes democracy, democracy. We each have things that impact us in our day-to-day lives, and if we want to see something change, voting is a good way to start, don't you think? But that's all we have time for today, folks. Our content comes from community questions, so if there's a question that makes you go, what the gov? Then send me an email with your name and question at socialmedia@laurel.md.us. Or if you're watching us on YouTube, be sure to leave us a like, subscribe to Laurel TV, and leave a comment with your question below. Here's to a future where we all know a little more than we did the day before. Take care.